Hello everyone, my name is Yulia, I'm an art director of the Type Foundry, and first of all we would like to say thank you to everybody who is here with us today. We are glad that people from all over the world are interested to hear the story about our current project. So today we would like to tell you about our recently released typeface TT Marxiana, our first revival project. The project turned out to be quite hard and long, but we are very happy with the result. The design team of this project, Marina and Anna, will tell you about an interesting research they made and about the design process itself, which was quite curious as well. And if you have any questions during the talk, you can write them in the chat and we will discuss them afterwards. So I think that's it about organizational issues, and now I give the floor to my colleagues.
Hello. Hello everybody, my name is Marina and I'm very glad to tell you about TT Marxiana project today. In July 2080, TypeType decided to make a revival of the fonts that were used by Russian typography in the beginning of the 20th century. By this time, there were already several large printing houses and the archetype of the Cyrillic alphabet itself was formed. The idea was to create a set of the fonts which would complement each other, but it should be completely different in style and have individual characteristics, such as character, historicity, emotionality. So the story began with the research in libraries and online archives. We studied expensive gift editions and looking for the font pearls there. As a result, we chose the 3-volume The History of Russian Literature by Nikolai Polivoy, printed in Adolf Marx Publishing House in 1903. Adolf Marx was a publisher, printer, bookseller and educator, and his work and life inspired us a lot. In these books, we have found a set of fonts good enough for our concept: Antiqua, Grotesque and the Elsevier. The first sketches made us think about the most general characteristics of the font: proportions, contrast, serif, shapes. The work went on, but despite this, the concept didn't suit us completely. We thought a lot about the meaning of the concept of the revival font itself. In one case, the term means a completely identity with the original. On the other case, means a fresh approach on the given theme, bringing the artistic novelty. On the one hand, our font family should have been very elegant and historical, and on the other hand, it should have been functional for the modern designers and not outdated. At that time, we did not understand clearly where to move, so we took the path of the artistic independence, carried away by trends and new software, and decided to develop our project in a global variable font. The idea was quite interesting, and we spent a lot of time trying to find the most harmonious transformation from one font to another, but it still looked very strange and wild. So it became clear that in this form the project cannot exist, and it was necessary to revise the concept or change the design of the referent fonts. Only a year after the start of work, the project got a second life, and it looked like a miracle. One of our colleagues found a fill-in of the Niva magazines for 1887 at her parents' dacha. The magazine was published weekly from the end of 1869 to September 1980 in the publishing house of Adolf Marx in St. Petersburg. And it was the cultural messenger of the time. Thanks to Marx's publishing strategy, of the low cost, the magazine became very popular and in few years reached the highest edition among all magazines in Russia. There were geographical, historical and medical articles, articles on science and arts, fiction, puzzles and classified ad pages in the end. Many names of Russian classics were discovered thanks to the Niva and Adolf Marx itself. The magazine has a great educational influence on the readers. The spirit of the era, industrial development, and the ad boom was reflected in the last spreads, which was designed based on who is louder principle. While the main part of the magazine was very conservative, 2 or 3 justified columns and central headings. The concept has taken shape. We got that modernized revivals are not uncommon, and we decided to focus on the historical components of the project. We wanted to take a careful approach to the prints we have and to restore the fonts alive and moving with defects obtained during printing. But most importantly, here we found a perfect set of the fonts. We focused on 4 main fonts: Antiqua, Antiqua Italic, Grotesque and the Elsevier. The magazine's Antiqua was narrower than the first one and with more interesting shapes. Almost all of the pages were printed using the text Antiqua. The drawing of the Italic was very close to the Antiqua, and the magazine used it to highlight something in the text. The Grotesque was very close to our first reference. It's quite bold and used by the magazine in subheadings and illustration captions. The Elsevier was used in all headings. At the very beginning of our work, we needed to study the magazines and find out the contrast and proportions of our fonts. The Antiqua was used in different point sizes. In the magazine, the smallest was about 8 points and the bigger about 10 points. Some letters could look different in different sizes, so we choose to work with the smallest one, as we found its rhyme and drawing most interesting. Due to poor quality of the paper and the specifics of printing, some characters were printed very bold. In others, details could disappear. We decided to keep this artifact, but do it most delicately as possible. Studying the magazine, we saw many unprinted or heavily deformed characters. These kind of characters added charm to the typeface. Therefore, we decided to make a set of the letters. After all, we understood which letters were missing and began to look for reference in the catalogues of the 19th and 20th century. The most interesting was to collect the Elsevier's characters. Such fonts are available with both lowercase characters and small caps. In the early issues of the Niva, a small caps was used, and we decided to add it to our project too. Moreover, we found Gauss Tales by Mavriky Wolf's publishing house, where Elsevier with a small caps was used in the headings. It was the final preparation. At this stage, we made many important decisions, and the project was formed in our hands and heads completely. And now Anya will tell you about the most interesting moments of the work on the typeface itself.
So I've started working on this project. I was given a pile of old magazines, scans, and some vector sketches made by Marina at previous stages of her work. My task as a designer was to create characters for this font the way they existed in the original magazine. So as you can see, this is a serif font. You can see there is lots of similar elements in these letters. As we are working in glyphs application, first I suggested it would be useful to use corner components for creating serifs in this font. I think this is a very useful tool if you work with serif fonts, so I'm going to tell you a little about it. The idea is quite simple. You create a special glyph called corner component where you design your serif, and then you just add it to all the letters where you need a serif. This is how it works. And if you have to make some changes in your serif, you just make a change in your corner component, and the changes will be automatically applied to all the letters. It saves lots of time to type designer. Of course, you cannot use only one type of serif. During the work, we needed different types of serif, some longer, some shorter. And you can see that even though we tried to keep it simple enough, we used more than 20 different types of serifs. More than that, we also used corner components in order to make roundings in this font. You can see that connections between strokes in letters are smooth. So in order to make them work in one system, we also created them as a corner components. Creating this system of corner components was quite fun, but it was more like a preparation for work. The real work and the biggest challenge was to find the right forms for our letters. You can see that the original prints we were using weren't perfect at all. Some letters were bolder, some letters were thinner, the quality wasn't stable, some characters could be damaged. But we didn't want to ignore this imperfection of letterpress printing. First, because imperfections are beautiful, and second, because without this vividness of original printing of 19th century, we couldn't recreate the font from the original magazine. So if at this moment you think, oh, it's quite simple, you have all the letters from the magazine, you can just trace it. I have to say, working on a project like that, you cannot just trace the letters. For example, which print of letter A was I supposed to trace? Which one is the correct one? The question is not how to trace the letters. The question is how to make them work as a system, as a font. For example, here you can see some stages of form searching for letter A. So from just type designer, I became designer / restorer / detective. There were three main questions I had to analyze. First, what was the train of thought of the original type designer in the 19th century? Next, how these imperfections of letterpress printing work? Which one do we need to keep and which one do we need to skip? And finally, the question is how to make it all good, adequate typeface for modern user. Our work was based on designing characters and comparing them with the original printing from this magazine. And there were a few tricky moments I wanted to share with you. As you can see, these round elements, they are called drops. Normally, they are supposed to be equal, but as you can see, they weren't equal at all. And this is not okay. We couldn't leave it just like that. We couldn't just trace the letters and leave the drop of letter A being 2 times bigger than drop of letter C, for example. So our task was to find the balance and find the right forms and size for these elements. And you can see how we dealt with that. There were many problems like that when we needed to balance between the imperfection of the original printing and the requirement of professionally done modern typeface. Another problem we faced were junctions. I would say that was one of the hardest part of the work on letters B, D, P, and Q. In letterpress printing, junctions often misbehave. They can be or too pale because of the lack of the paint, or they can be overflown because there were too much paint. As you can see at this letter Q, the top part is very bold because there were too much paint, and the lower part almost disappears because of the lack of the paint. Again, we couldn't leave it just like that. We had to find the right balance and the right contrast for these elements. Actually, junctions are very important for the plasticity of the font. At this picture you can see again how vivid the original typeface, the original printing. So we tried a dozen of different forms of junctions, working on plasticity and contrast, and also there was a very important moment when we tried to print our font in the small size, actually in the size which was used in the original magazine, and we compared with our font with pages from the magazine. We wanted to be sure that our font corresponds to the printing page of the Niva magazine. It's a very complicated task, and now I really think that sometimes it's easier to design a new font than reconstruct an old one. So this is how our work was going. We were designing characters and comparing them with the original source. I think we would never have stopped improving it and polishing it up, but we have a project manager. A project manager gave us a strict deadline, and somehow deadline helped us a lot with this form searching and improving. One more problem I want to mention is that not all of the characters existed in the original magazine. For example, Eurosign simply didn't exist at the time. So we designed it from scratch. For other missing characters, we looked in all type catalogs. For example, this form of German double S, the form you can see on the left, we found it in 19th century type catalog. It was relevant for this time period, but we didn't like how it worked in our font. So we kept working on this form, and finally we agreed on the form you can see on the right. Also, we understand that this form on the left can be not very familiar for our users, and we also added the form you can see on the right as an alternate form. This form is a little bit more common, and also you can also use it in our font. And at the end of the work on letter design, we also created a set of alternate characters which imitate the letterpress printing with these imperfections and blind spots. This is how it works. So that was my short review of Marxiana Antiqua, and now Marina will continue with Marxiana Antiqua Italic.
Well, it was decided to give the drawing of the Italic to our colleague who works remotely. It was a little nervous to let the project out of sight. There were doubts if it possible to convey all the subtleties that we realized in the process of working on the Antiqua. So we passed scans for work and a ready-made Antiqua font from which all the basic values could be taken. We walked step by step. At the first drawn several of the basic letters and given a feedback. Then was made a next set and was given a feedback, and so on. The first steps took a little more time to arrive at a similar result. The feedback looked like a battle plan. However, soon we understood each other and the work went faster. There are not many Latin letters in the Niva, and we find only one letter K in the whole filling. It has a strange, almost Cyrillic form, and we decided to add a more familiar letter alternative form. The result of work was great, but not perfect. We tested it in print, as we did with the Antiqua. Earlier, we decided to do the last correction by ourselves. We continued editing the contours, printing it, and looking at the result. And we did it several times before the results suits us. When we finished editing the contours, all of the serifs, forms of the round figures, some proportions and metrics was corrected. A few words about Grotesque. The main work began with the transfer the sketch drawn in the Adobe Illustrator to the glyphs. We continued to work with the first sketches as the Grotesque in the magazine was the same as in the first book reference. While working on this typeface, we had to think about the degree of deformation of the characters. In small size, the corners were rounded and the endings of the stems looked thicker than the middle. The drawing was a little scary with its mobility, and sometimes it seemed that we need to pacify it a little. However, we tested in print and the font looked good and harmonious. We decided to keep this effect, and here the corner component was useful again. The final touch was the revision of the uppercase characters. During testing, it became clear that the capital letters are very bold here. However, the magazine font also has this effect. We fixed something, but decided to leave uppercase characters as it was. This is one of the decisions we made in favor of historicity. We wanted to achieve an ideal result, but in this case the ideal was imperfection. And now, before Anya will tell you about the fourth font of the TT Marxiana, about our beautiful heading font Elsevier, I want to add a few words about decorative element in the font family. As I said, we didn't want to forget about the classified spreads. Its historical value are not less than the content of the magazine itself. It was to peak of type design development in the early 20th century. So we find all kinds of frames in our filling of the Niva and added the decorative elements in our font. We wondered if we might add more frames from the catalogs, but we decided to stop at the set from the Niva only. It is quite versatile and could solve many design tasks. With this set, you can make the borders to separate blocks of text, for example, or to decorate the layout. Or using the same elements with the corners, you can make frames. Like that. You only need to type the appropriate element several times. Besides, to separate blocks of text, you can use the text dividers. There were also hand arrows in the Niva. It were black due to print roughness, but usually in the editions of that time were used black or white head arrows, depends of the different layouts. So we did both. Besides, we added a set of the common arrows. In the add part of the Niva, there were very interesting knockout frames. It looked like white letters on the black background. We thought how to use this kind of design in our project. It was made a research in the catalogs and decided to add the knockout set for the Grotesque. So now you can use it in 1 or 2 line reversed text frame. You can see that every black square with the letters has rounded corners. And between every couple of the squares there are a little space in 2 points. It was done because in the Niva there are similar visual effect in this case. With TT Marxiana, any font user could create an ad layout in style of the beginning of the 20th century. And of course, we had to do the feature with switch on the Prereform Orthography. Throughout the 18th and 19th century, Russian language was simplified and some letters disappeared. So now we have modern and pre-reform orthography, which was used in the Niva. We decided that it will be fun if we could replacing modern letters by old ones. And it was, in theory. We supposed to write a couple of rules for switch letters and add 20 or so exceptions words. And it works for the 4 letters, more or less, but with the 5th yet, there was a great problem. In Russian language, there are a mess of rules, depends on the part of speech, or even from the place of a letter in the part of word. And those kind of rules very complex to write down with the code. Besides, we have a several form of every word, plus a lot of prefixes and suffixes. Therefore, if we take the adjective white, for example, and write all its forms, we get about 100 words. And then we need to add all possible prefixes and suffixes to each of these words, and then repeat it for every verbs and other part of speech with the same root. To understand the full scale of the work, I will add their website slavenica.com. It was made for translation a modern text into a Prereform one, and it has been developed over the years, and its vocabulary contains almost 1.5 million words. So our technique expert worked very hard to reread the endless rules and revise thousands of exceptions words. And at the stage of testing this feature, it turned out that for the correct switch on the letter year at the end of the words, it is necessary to create the appropriate ligature with it. So we added 74 couples in each font. As a result, it works and looks very cool, but it is mostly a decorative feature than functional. The Russian language is too huge for making this project like that as optional. And now Anya will conclude our speech with a few words about the Elsevier.
Okay. There was a special font for headlines in this magazine, and of course we couldn't ignore it. We called this typeface Elsevier. Elsevier is different from Maxiana Antiqua. First, it's a display font. You can see it in the first line. It was used in big size, and it has less deformations and imperfections than we saw in previous typefaces. Also, it has different proportions and contrast. The forms are much more precise and clear, and we wanted to keep them like that. At the first stages of our work, it was very important for us to find the right forms for serifs and all ending elements of Elsevier typeface. As we wanted our form to be clear, first we created its serifs in a rectangle shape with acute, non-rounded angles. These serifs looked good, but there were some general mismatch with the magazine references. So we kept working, and we wanted to make our serifs more gentle. So we added these small roundings to them. You can see the difference between our first draft of Elsevier and the final cut. Also, I would like to turn your attention to another interesting element, drops. They are not rounded like they were in Marxiana Antiqua. Even though the print on the left is a little bit blurred, you can see that drops have this pointy form. So our task was to recreate this form in Elsevier. And you know, it was quite challenging because when you add some sharpness and pointy forms to your characters, you easily get a contemporary look, some modern vibe, and the modern vibe that wasn't what we wanted for this typeface. So we worked hard, and you can see how we dealt with this task. As Elsevier wasn't used in large amount of text in the magazine, again, it was used only for headlines. We didn't have pictures of all the letters we needed. As a matter of fact, we only had Cyrillic letters in the original source. So almost all the Latin characters we created from scratch, and based on Cyrillic letters, of course. This font has a great bonus. It contains small caps and alternate uppercase forms with swashes. Speaking about small caps, we didn't have lots of prints with small caps in the magazine, again because we didn't have lots of Elsevier from this magazine. So we created small caps also based on catalogs examples and of course based on uppercase forms of Elsevier. Small caps work great with uppercase alternative forms with swashes. Let's have a look at swashes. They have their own logic system. We divided them on 4 categories. First, swashes for stems, like in letter H. Next, we have swashes for rounded letters, like letter C. Also, we have swashes for diagonal strokes. And finally, we have a group of letters where the leg of the letter becomes a swash, like a letter R. Also, we suppose that designer is going to use these swashes like it was used in the magazine, so only for first letters in the word. We recommend not using swashes for each letter in each word. It might be, too much. So our work on Elsevier was the final step of designing contours of Marxiana font family. However, that wasn't enough yet to release the font. And that was the moment when our technical team got involved in the project. Their part of work included testing, hinting, work on OpenType features, and of course kerning. Every font we create in TypeType has kerning. But to be honest, initially we were thinking about not adding kerning in Marxiana font family at all. Let me remind you that in the first place this font existed in metal forms. What you see on the right, it's called poinçons or punches, and with these elements words were composed in the original magazine, of course with the help of the gentleman that you can see on the left. So in some cases could appear gaps between letters. If you look at the distance between 2 letters H, you might notice that it's quite different from the distance between letter A and V. Actually, we see the large gap between letter A and V on this picture. And the problem is that as those letters were made from steel, you cannot squeeze them. You cannot adjust space between A and V, like, no way. But normally it's supposed to be equal to the space between 2 letters H. That's why in the original magazine the text might be too dispersed sometimes with such gaps and imperfections. So we had the thought of leaving it like that, but after some discussions we decided that it would look more like defect and it wouldn't be comfortable for our users. So all in all, we had more than 1,000 kerning pairs for each typeface in Marxiana font family. Here you can see the difference between text without kerning, this is the first line, and then the kerning is on. You can see that we adjusted the space between V and A, D and V, and so on, so on, so some process of work on kerning made by our technical team. Also, every font we produce has hinting. Hinting is needed to make typeface more readable in small sizes. Here you can see the difference between text before hinting and text after hinting. You can see that before hinting some words in small size might be quite unreadable. You can read more about hinting in our blog on our website. Apart from kerning and hinting, our technical team is in charge of making all features work. All the stylistic set we showed you previously can be turned on in the application you use. So, after all this work, we finally got a font, and now we can recreate the printing of Niva magazine. Here on the left, you can see the page from the original magazine of 19th century. And on the right is our copy recreated with Marxiana font family. Our goal was to create this font as close to the original as possible. But as I already said, it has to be comfortable for modern user. For this reason, we decided not to keep original leading using in the magazine. On the right, you can see that the line space was very tight. It seemed like we tried to fit as much text as possible on one page. But again, we are not in the 19th century anymore. So we increased the space between lines in order to make text more readable, as you can see on the right. Of course, if you want, you always can adjust leading the way you need it. Maxiana font is our first project of font reconstruction from a historical reference. And with such amount of complicated questions and our attention to details, it took us 2 years to complete this project. We learned a lot from this process, and also we really loved this project. I hope you enjoyed our story, and if you have any questions, we are ready to answer.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Marina. It was a very interesting talk. And I believe we don't have any questions to you. So
Okay.
I believe we can finish at that point. We would like to say thank you to all the listeners and goodbye.